She walked into that mansion thinking it would be just another day of work, a floor to scrub, furniture to polish, and stairs to endure. But as she raised her eyes to the grand hall, the world seemed to stop. Before her, hanging on the main wall, was the portrait of the man who once promised to love her and who disappeared without explanation. The same man she believed had fled out of shame of her, and worse still, was the father of her daughter. Isabella's heart raced, and a knot formed in her throat. That photo wasn't just a memory of the past. It was a reopened wound, a truth buried under years of silence. And without knowing it, upon entering that mansion, she had crossed the threshold between the past and destiny. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same after that gaze frozen in paint and frame. Isabella always believed that a mother's love is a force that knows no limits, capable of moving even what seems impossible. From a very young age, she learned that life doesn't hand out anything for free, and that suffering only becomes lighter when you transform it into purpose. She was an obese woman, yes, but the greatness of her heart was much greater than any judgment she might receive. She lived in a small apartment with peeling walls, where the sound of medicines being opened mixed with the weak laughter of her daughter, Emma, a little 6-year-old girl who fought against an illness that drained her strength day after day. Medical bills piled up like mountains, and desperation was already knocking at the door. It was then that Isabella received news of a cleaning lady position at a luxurious mansion in the wealthy part of town. The salary was good, the conditions strict, and the distance from home enormous. But none of that mattered. She saw in that opportunity a chance to give her daughter back the right to dream, to live without pain. And even if the whole world mocked her appearance or doubted her ability, she was willing to prove that a mother is capable of anything when love speaks louder than fear. The day she arrived at the Grant Mansion, Isabella felt her heart tighten in a different way. It wasn't just nervousness. It was a strange sensation of entering a universe that didn't belong to her, a world of thick carpets, imposing chandeliers, and expensive perfume that seemed to stick to the air. The iron gate opened slowly, revealing a house that looked more like a castle, with tall windows and walls covered by perfectly trimmed ivy. She held tightly to her worn bag, where she kept Emma's photo, her lunch wrapped in paper, and a recommendation letter written in simple handwriting. Each step she took echoed as if the house were watching her, testing her courage. The employees passed by hurriedly, with impeccable uniforms and gazes that didn't linger on anyone. Isabella knew that people like her were just shadows, hands that clean but are never seen. Still, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and promised herself it would be worth it, because deep down, she had learned that great new beginnings always start in silence, and that even a cleaning lady can carry within herself a story worthy of respect. During the first moment at the new job, Isabella felt the weight of responsibility mixed with an almost spiritual sense of purpose. As she cleaned the long corridors and shiny floors, she remembered each medical appointment, each sleepless night caring for Emma, and the times when the money simply wasn't enough. The fatigue seemed not to matter when she thought of her daughter's smile. It was as if each folded towel, each polished floor, each speck of dust removed was a step toward hope. But there was also an emptiness that insisted on growing. The mansion, with all its beauty, seemed to hide something, a heavy silence, almost palpable, as if the walls guarded exciting stories that no one dared to tell. Isabella didn't know it yet, but that place carried a part of her own past, a truth that was about to emerge from the shadows. And it was there, on that same floor she scrubbed with such dedication, that destiny would begin to unfold again, mixing pain, love, and redemption in a plot that would change everything. Mrs. Eleanor Grant was the type of woman who wore elegance like armor. Tall, imposing, with gray hair always pulled back in a perfect bun, she seemed to have been molded by time itself, cold, precise, almost inaccessible. She possessed a gaze that weighed heavy, but never wavered, a calm voice that sounded sweet only on the surface, but had the rigidity of someone who lived too long imposing order on chaos. The mansion was a faithful reflection of her soul, impeccable, silent, and predictable. Each object seemed to have a sacred place, and each step was measured as if the floor could register mistakes. The curtains were always aligned, the flowers always changed on Mondays, and dinner always served at 7 o'clock sharp. Nothing escaped Mrs. Grant's control, except the emptiness that, from time to time, escaped through her eyes when she believed she was alone. They say the silence of a house says a lot about who inhabits it, and in that mansion, the silence screamed real stories that no one dared to mention. When Isabella saw her for the first time, she was breathless. The woman before her seemed to have come from another world, so distant, so untouchable, that the simple act of being there already made her feel small. Mrs. Grant observed her for a few seconds, analyzing her from top to bottom, and then just nodded with a slight move of her head, without even a hint of a smile. "Say hello and go to work," she said in a polite but icy tone. Isabella understood the message. In that house, friendships weren't made, exciting stories weren't told, nor were pains shared. Everyone had their role, and hers was to clean, be quiet, and disappear among the expensive furniture. Still, something in the employer's expression caught her attention. It was a tired look, a shadow that contrasted with all that appearance of strength. As if behind so much discipline there existed an old wound, carefully hidden beneath the varnish of wealth. Isabella, even without knowing why, felt a strange empathy. She sensed, almost instinctively, that woman also carried a wounded heart, perhaps different from her own, but equally heavy. As the days passed, Isabella began to notice subtle details. The way Mrs. Grant touched the edges of the piano, as if searching for a lost memory. The distant way she looked at the portrait hanging in the main hallway, a huge painting of a young man with a serene smile and deep gaze. Sometimes at night, Isabella could hear the employer's footsteps echoing through the empty house, accompanied by a slight sob that she pretended not to hear. It was as if, behind that wall of luxury and coldness, there existed a woman who had loved too much and lost everything. Isabella, moved by her kind nature, began to feel a silent compassion. She understood the weight of hiding pain, of living appearing strong when the heart begs for rest. But she still didn't imagine how much that woman was connected to her destiny. And gradually, the invisible lines between the two began to intertwine, preparing the stage for a revelation that would completely transform both their stories. The first week at the mansion was, for Isabella, a silent journey through territory full of sharp looks. There was a type of invisible hierarchy among the employees, a game of appearances that she had never learned to play. The women in the kitchen whispered among themselves, always impeccable in their white uniforms and starched aprons, and as soon as Isabella passed by, conversations would lower in tone and laughter would multiply. It didn't take long to understand she was a target. Comment about her body, said in cutting whispers, hurt more than any direct words. "She barely fits in that uniform," she heard once, when she passed by with the bucket in her hands. She pretended not to hear, but the pain remained. Being judged by her appearance wasn't new. That had happened since she was a girl. But being there, among people she barely knew, made everything seem worse. She felt like an intruder in a world that hadn't been made for her, as if with each step she reaffirmed how much she didn't fit in. Still, she continued, firm, silent, determined, because deep down, she knew her mission went far beyond that. During break times, Isabella took refuge in the back area of the mansion, where the noise of pots and vacuum cleaners dissipated in the air. She would sit on a small stone bench, under the shade of an old lemon tree, and let her thoughts run free. There, no one judged her. She would close her eyes and imagine Emma smiling, calling her my hero, as she did before bed. Those memories were the fuel that kept her going. She also thought about the real stories she had heard about people who overcame rejection and found their own worth. Exciting stories that seemed distant, but somehow kindled hope within her. Isabella wanted to believe that one day she would also have a story like that to tell. One where she wasn't the ridiculed woman, but the brave mother who conquered the impossible. And even when tears insisted on falling, she would take a deep breath, wipe her face with her apron, and return to work, because giving up wasn't part of who she was. As the days passed, something curious began to happen. Isabella, even though quiet, began to awaken a type of discomfort among her co-workers. It was as if her silent strength provoked in others an uncomfortable mirror. There was something in her way of being, that natural kindness, that sincere gaze, that contrasted with the cynicism and indifference of those who had grown accustomed to serving without feeling. And despite the laughter and whispers, she never retaliated. She fulfilled each task with dedication, treated everyone with respect, and gradually, the mansion began to breathe differently. Some employees began to observe her with curiosity, others with guilt. Isabella didn't notice, but she was transforming the environment just by being who she was. And it was precisely during this period, when she was beginning to get used to the routine, that something extraordinary happened. While cleaning the main hall, her eyes lifted by chance, and time once again stopped, because what she saw hanging on the wall would change everything she believed about the past, love, and destiny itself. That morning, the sun streamed through the mansion's tall windows, painting the marble floor with golden tones. Isabella was already accustomed to the almost religious silence of that place, but something in that atmosphere seemed different. The air was heavier, as if time had stopped just to observe what was about to happen. With the cloth in her hands, she walked to the main hall, the most imposing room in the house, with a high-ceiling, velvet curtains, and antique furniture that exuded power. The floor's shine reflected her tired image, and for an instant, she thought about how her life had become a sequence of identical days. Until, upon raising her eyes, the world simply collapsed. Before her, hanging in the center of the main wall, was a huge portrait of a young man with a serene smile and familiar gaze. A gaze she knew better than her own voice. It was Alexander, the same Alexander who, 5 years earlier, had made her believe in love, the man she thought had disappeared out of shame of being seen with an obese woman, and more painfully still, the father of her daughter, Emma. For a few seconds, Isabella couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled, the cloth fell, and a silent tear escaped before she even realized it. Her mind scrambled, thoughts colliding with each other. "It can't be," she murmured, as if wanting to convince fate that this was an illusion. But the portrait remained there, imposing, real, undeniable. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed to want to burst from her chest. Each feature of his face, each curve of that painted smile, brought back memories she fought so hard to bury. The first time he held her hand, the day he promised he would never leave her, the last hug when he said he would return. Isabella leaned on the nearby table, feeling her legs weaken. It was as if the entire past had invaded that hall all at once, mixed with pain, longing, and disbelief. And worst of all, that painting was there, inside Mrs. Grant's mansion, the woman who was now her employer. The shock soon gave way to a whirlwind of questions. What was that portrait doing there? Who was Alexander really? Why had fate crossed their paths again after so many years? Isabella knew none of this was coincidence. The heart, that old sage disguised as muscle, whispered that there was a greater reason for everything. Still dazed, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a few steps closer to the painting, as if she could talk to it. "Why did you leave me?" she thought silently, feeling a mixture of love and anger that only those who have been abandoned understand. In that instant, the hall seemed to whisper secrets, and Alexander's face, frozen in the painting, seemed almost alive. It was then that a voice sounded behind her, the firm and elegant voice of Mrs. Grant. Isabella turned quickly, her heart almost leaping from her mouth. And it was at that exact moment that she began to discover that the truth behind that portrait was much darker and more unexpected than any pain she had ever felt. 5 years before that moment at the mansion, Isabella's world was very different. Simple, small, but full of little pieces of hope. She worked at a corner bakery, the type of place that smelled of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee, where morning started early and laughter was a spice of routine. Dressed in her floral apron and her hair always pulled back in a makeshift bun, Isabella greeted each customer with a genuine smile, the kind you don't learn. They're born with the soul. It was there, among trays of croissants and display cases of pastries, that she saw him for the first time, Alexander, a tall man with serene expression and curious gaze, who came in asking only for a sweet roll and a strong coffee, but left taking her heart with him. The first conversation was timid, but left traces. He seemed different from the others. He looked at her with kindness, without hurry, without looking away, as if he wanted to discover what lay behind the simplicity of that woman. Isabella, accustomed to being invisible, felt notice in a way that made the whole world disappear for a few seconds. From that day on, Alexander began to frequent the bakery regularly, always at the same time, always with the same discreet smile. Gradually, good morning became conversation. Conversation became laughter, and the laughter began to transform into something deeper. He told stories about travels, books, and music, and she, between one bread and another, talked about life difficulties and dreams she kept secret. Alexander never asked invasive questions. He seemed to enjoy listening to her, as if each word of hers were a gift. Isabella began to allow herself to feel again. After years of being the target of looks and judgments, she had found someone who didn't see in her just an obese woman, but a human being full of light. Over time, the meetings went beyond the bakery walls. He would wait for her at the end of her shift. They would walk through the simple streets of the city, and sometimes he would hold her hand as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. And it was like that, unpretentiously, that a pure, beautiful, and silent love was born, the kind that seems like small miracles amid life's chaos. But love, when it's true, is sometimes also the most challenging. Alexander seemed to live between two worlds. There were days when he was whole, present, attentive, generous, and others when he became distant, as if something troubled him. Isabella noticed but didn't insist. She was afraid to ask, afraid that any wrong word would break that fragile enchantment that united them. Still, even in the absences, she believed in him. She believed in what they saw in each other's eyes, in that type of connection that can't be explained. It was during one of those afternoons, sitting on a park bench while the sun said goodbye to the day, that Alexander kissed her for the first time. It was a simple kiss, but loaded with truth, the kind that marks you forever. And in that instant, Isabella believed that finally love had remembered her. Little did she know that that same love, so pure and unlikely, would also be the starting point of her greatest pain. Because what seemed like a simple tale of tenderness was about to collide with the cruel reality of appearances, and the truth that Alexander here would change everything she believed about him and about herself. Their love flourished in silence, hidden between gestures and glances that only the two of them understood. But the more Isabella gave herself to that story, the more she felt there was something in the air, a shadow that hovered over Alexander, a weight he seemed to carry without ever saying. He came less and less, spoke less and less, until one day, instead of his usual smile, he brought a distant, almost cold look. Isabella tried to disguise the fear she felt, but something inside her already sensed that that moment of happiness had an expiration date. And she was right. The next morning, the bakery was crowded as usual. Isabella was arranging the bread in the display case when she heard the muffled laughter of some customers, whispering Alexander's name among cutting words. When she looked up, she saw a group of elegantly dressed women entering the place, and among them, Alexander himself, in an impeccable suit, next to a blonde woman with an arrogant look, holding his arm. He pretended not to see her. He pretended he never knew her. He pretended Isabella was just another invisible attendant. The scene lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to destroy everything she believed. The women began to laugh. One of them commented too loudly that some men have curious tastes, and the laughter echoed like a slap in the face. Isabella felt the floor disappear. Her hands trembled, her chest burned, and her teary eyes fought against the tears that insisted on falling. Alexander didn't say a word. He just looked away and left, leaving the expensive perfume and deadly silence as the only traces. That afternoon, Isabella couldn't continue working. The heart that once beat fast with love now weighed heavy with shame and disbelief. She went home without saying anything to anyone, locked herself in her room, and cried until her body ached. She didn't cry just for him, but for what they made her feel, as if the love of a simple, fat woman were something that needed to be hidden, erased, forgotten. The pain of rejection is cruel, but that of public humiliation is devastating, because it doesn't just destroy love, it destroys dignity. In the following days, Alexander disappeared completely. No message, no sign, nothing. Isabella tried to understand, tried to find an explanation that would ease away the wound, but there was no possible justification for someone who treated her like a shameful secret. It was in that cutting solitude that she discovered she was pregnant. The shock mixed with desperation, her heart divided between fear and the love that still insisted on existing within her. She thought about telling him, but the memory of that humiliation at the bakery stopped her. How could she tell a man who denied her in front of everyone that he would be a father? Isabella decided to go on alone, facing the looks and judgments, raising her daughter with the little she had and the much she felt. And so, with her womb full of life and her heart shattered, she promised herself that she would never allow herself to be humiliated again. Little did she know that years later, fate would lead her back to the same man, but now in a completely opposite position, when she entered that mansion without knowing that the face hanging on the wall belonged to her daughter's father. Isabella's heart was still beating erratically when she looked back at that portrait in the mansion. His features seemed frozen in time, but the eyes... Oh, the eyes were the same that once made her believe in love. The same gaze that now, even painted, hurt her as if it had life. She thought about quitting right there, running away, erasing the past once more, but her legs wouldn't obey. She stood there, feeling her throat burn, as if each memory wanted to escape in a scream that couldn't come out. It was at that instant that his voice echoed in the hall. "Isabella," he said, in a surprised and almost incredulous tone. The sound of her name in his voice was like a blow. She turned slowly, her entire body trembling, and there he was, Alexander, in the flesh, more mature, more serious, but with the same gaze she tried so hard to forget. He wore an expensive suit, the same air of superiority he used as a shield, but when their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Neither of them knew what to say. The silence that separated them was heavier than any word. Alexander took a few steps toward her, hesitant, confused, as if trying to understand if this was real. Isabella, for a moment, wanted to believe there was some regret in his gaze, but the pride was still there, intact like a wall. "You work here?" he asked, as if he needed to confirm the obvious. Isabella swallowed hard and answered only with a nod. She didn't want to give him the pleasure of hearing her trembling voice. The owner of the house, a middle-aged woman, haughty and cold, appeared immediately, greeting Alexander with reverence. She was his mother, and in that instant, Isabella understood everything. This was the home where he grew up, the place that had shaped the man who abandoned her. The weight of shame, the fear of disapproval, all made sense now. His mother looked at Isabella from top to bottom, with a look that mixed contempt and distrust, and asked, with poorly disguised irony, if she knew how to polish silver. Isabella just nodded, but inside something shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was the same look society always gave her, the look that said she wasn't enough, not pretty, not thin, not worthy. The tension among the three filled the air like a dense fog. Isabella tried to maintain composure, continued working, pretending not to feel the weight of his eyes on her. Alexander watched in silence, and in each of her movements seemed to see fragments of the past he had tried to erase. There was a timid regret hidden behind his cold expression, but the fear of confrontation paralyzed him. Isabella, on the other hand, was no longer the same woman from the bakery. Suffering had hardened her, but had also made her stronger. While she polished the furniture and avoided looking at him, a silent war happened inside her. Her heart still pulsed with memories, but reason screamed not to fall again into the trap of the love that destroyed her. When she finished the work and walked toward the door, she heard his voice again. "Isabella, wait. We need to talk." She stopped, but didn't turn around. A single tear rolled down her face, while she answered in a firm whisper, "Some conversations come too late, Mr. Alexander." And she left, leaving him surrounded by the echo of his own cowardice. But fate hadn't finished with them yet, and what would come next would prove that the past always finds a way to collect what was left pending. Isabella stood before the large portrait of Alexander, dusting carefully, as if touching not just a frame, but also the memories the man had left. The mansion's air seemed heavy, loaded with silent expectation. Mrs. Eleanor Grant entered the hall and stopped behind her, observing each movement. The silence lasted seconds that seemed like hours, until the woman spoke with a cold calm, but carrying something unexpected. "He died, Isabella, 5 years ago, in a car accident." The words fell like stones in the young woman's chest. Her mouth closed, her eyes filled with tears, and her mind tried to process that cruel truth. She spent years believing that Alexander had abandoned her out of shame, that embarrassment about her appearance had driven away the man she loved and left her alone with a small daughter. But suddenly, everything made sense. The pain, the silence, the sudden disappearance. The truth, as painful as it was liberating, revealed that his love was never denied, only interrupted by fate, abruptly and cruelly. Isabella's heart oscillated between despair and relief. On one hand, she felt destroyed for having carried guilt and shame for so many years, thinking the abandonment had been his choice. On the other, there was a strange sensation of freedom. Finally, the weight she carried could be placed on life's table without fear or judgment. Mrs. Grant, who until then maintained her impenetrable posture, approached cautiously, almost instinctively. "Emma is his daughter, isn't she?" she asked, in a low voice, almost fearing the answer. Isabella nodded, and in that moment, something changed in the mansion's cold atmosphere. The silence, which before was heavy and threatening, began to become a space of understanding. Mrs. Grant looked at the young woman with less rigid eyes, touched by the truth that finally emerged. The same portrait that seemed just a decorative object now became a witness to exciting stories of lives intertwined by love, loss, and destiny. With her heart still trembling, Isabella told Mrs. Grant Emma's complete story, recounting the years of struggle, fears, laughter, and tears. And gradually, the barrier that separated the two women began to crumble. Mrs. Grant realized that granddaughter, so clever and full of life, was a living connection to Alexander, and that the girl needed care and protection. She decided, then, to welcome them both, helping with medical expenses, offering support, and mainly creating a genuine bond of love and family. The mansion, once cold and silent, began to transform. Emma's laughter echoed through the hallways. Isabella finally felt accepted, and even the memory of the father, which before hurt, now became a symbol of true love that couldn't be erased. And there, among paintings, antique furniture, and soft lights, Isabella realized that life, even after so many trials, could still surprise, bringing healing, reconciliation, and a new chance of happiness. The revelation brought a wave of emotion that seemed to fill every corner of the mansion. Isabella, still with tears in her eyes, felt Mrs. Grant's hand gently rest on hers, a gesture that by itself carried more comfort than words could convey. It was acceptance, not just of Isabella's story, but also the daughter she carried and cared for with so much love. Emma, watching closely, didn't understand all the details, but felt the warmth of that moment, the sensation of being recognized, seen, and loved. Mrs. Grant, who always maintained an emotional distance, allowed her granddaughter's presence to invade her own rigid routine, showing that affection could be stronger than discipline and control. Isabella realized that woman, once almost unimaginable to approach, was becoming an ally, someone who would share not just material resources, but also her heart. The weight of years of struggle and loneliness seemed to diminish, and a different future began to take shape before them, full of hope and belonging. As the day went on, Isabella began to feel the mansion breathe in a new way. Each room seemed to come alive with little Emma's laughter, each hall filled with memories that were once dormant, as if love were capable of resurrecting even the coldest places. Mrs. Grant took on the responsibility of helping them, but did more than that. She created a space of belonging, showing that true wealth isn't just in possessions, but in the capacity to welcome and care. Isabella felt a mixture of gratitude and relief, as if she had finally found a safe harbor. The girl ran to the corridors, pointed out details of the paintings and furniture, and even commented on Alexander's portrait, feeling, even without fully understanding, her father's presence. Each gesture of affection from Mrs. Grant was a reminder that fate had finally aligned, showing that despite all obstacles, life still reserves moments of reparation and healing. In the following days, the mansion transformed into a place of life again. The silence that once weighed heavy was now filled with laughter, conversations, and the smell of food being prepared with care and attention. Isabella, who once felt invisible and judged, was now respected and valued, not for who she appeared to be, but for the love she carried and the strength of having persevered. Mrs. Grant, once distant and rigid, found joy in her granddaughter's presence and in the mother's story of overcoming. Alexander's portrait, which caused pain and shock, now became a symbol of acceptance, memory, and true love, proof that he never felt shame of her, and that destiny only waited for the right moment to unite what was always meant to be together. Every corner of the mansion carried the energy of a new family, and Isabella finally realized that life, with all its trials, could transform pain into love, loss into reconciliation, and loneliness into absolute belonging. The transformation of the mansion was gradual, but profound. Each day brought something new. Emma ran through the corridors with contagious energy, laughing loudly, spreading toys and curiosity in every corner. Isabella felt her heart light for the first time in years, realizing that the pain and fear that accompanied her for so long were being replaced by hope and belonging. Mrs. Grant, once rigid and distant, now allowed herself to smile more, participate in her granddaughter's games, and share stories that had been trapped in her silence. The entire mansion seemed to breathe differently, as if each wall, each painting, and each piece of furniture recognized the importance of their presence. Alexander's portrait, which once brought shock and pain, was now contemplated with respect and affection. For Isabella, it wasn't just a memory of the man she loved and lost. It was a symbol that true love knows no shame, knows no limits, and above all, survives time and adversity. Life inside the mansion reorganized around laughter, shared meals, and small traditions that were born spontaneously. Isabella felt the power of her achievements, how much she had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles and transformed pain into strength, loneliness into family. Emma, curious and observant, began to call Mrs. Grant Grandma, and that acceptance was received with discreet tears and emotional smiles. Each gesture of care and affection reinforced that this union wasn't just a reparation of the past, but the construction of a present full of meaning. Isabella began to realize that no matter how much it suffered, love had different ways of manifesting itself. Sometimes it arrived unexpectedly, in moments that seemed impossible to reconcile with human logic. It was in this environment of love and understanding that the obese young woman finally understood that her struggle hadn't been in vain. Each step taken, each tear shed, each silence endured prepared her for that moment of complete acceptance. At the height of this transformation, Isabella looked at Alexander's portrait and felt a mixture of longing and gratitude. He, who once was a symbol of pain and abandonment, now became the link that united 3 generations through love and understanding. The mansion, once empty and silent, was now a living space, full of exciting stories and learning about forgiveness, empathy, and connection. Isabella realized that fate had waited patiently for each piece to fit at the right moment, showing that life, even with its cruel twists, always finds a way to balance pain and happiness. Each of Emma's laughs, each caring gesture from Mrs. Grant, and each memory of Alexander merged into a mosaic of emotions that could never be erased. And so, between overcome pain, recovered love, and renewed hope, Isabella finally understood that the past doesn't define the future, but prepares the path so that happiness, when it arrives, is complete, intense, and true. Isabella's story shows us that even in the face of pain, abandonment, and the judgment of others, it's possible to transform your own life with courage, persistence, and love. How many times have you let fear or shame control your decisions? Each challenge, each loss or humiliation can be fuel for a stronger and more inspiring journey, just as Isabella found strength to care for her daughter, face the past, and rebuild a home full of life and love. Destiny only acts in favor of those who dare to act, and the question that remains is, will you allow fear to shape your story, or will you take control of your life today? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow more exciting stories full of twists and lessons that can transform your path.